to the Third Shift Crafts podcast. I'm Lauren, and today's episode is one of my favorites because we're talking about tools. Now, before your mind runs straight to expensive gadgets or fancy setups, let me stop you right there. This isn't about having the biggest shop, the latest grill, or the priciest gear. I've been down that road of thinking I needed to buy everything before I could start. And let me tell you, half of those fancy gadgets ended up collecting dust in a drawer while I kept reaching for the same few tools over and over again. When I say tools I can't live without, I'm talking about the ones that actually see the most use in my day-to-day making life. They're the tools that make my projects smoother, my meals tastier, and my whole creative rhythm a lot more enjoyable. Some are practical and straightforward, some are a little surprising, and some are just plain comforting to have nearby. The funny thing about tools is that they often carry stories. A chisel in my shop isn't just a chisel, it's the one that taught me patience when I tried to force it through the wrong type of wood. A pair of tongs by the grill isn't just a pair of tongs. It's the one I nearly wore out flipping whole chickens for Sunday dinners. Even my so-called wild card tools have a story to tell, because they've become part of the rituals I lean on week after week. And that's kind of the bigger point I want to make in this episode. The best tools aren't necessarily the fanciest ones. They're the ones that fit in your hands, your habits, and your rhythms. I've had tools that were supposedly top of the line, but just didn't click with me. I've had budget-friendly grab-it-at-the-hardware store tools that turned out to be the absolute workhorses I'd never give up. Think about it like cooking. You don't need a $500 chef's knife to make a great meal. You just need a knife that's sharp, comfortable in your hand, and reliable. The same principle applies whether you're building a cutting board in the garage, searing a steak on the grill, or even stirring a batch of homemade wine. The right tool doesn't overcomplicate things. It makes the process lighter, easier, and honestly, a lot more joyful. I also think the tools we choose say something about how we approach life. Some people are gear collectors, and hey, no judgment if that's you. Others, like me, slowly realize that it's not about the collection. It's about the connection. A well-used tool, whether it's a hammer with a dented handle or a spatula that's seen better days, tells a story of everything you've made with it. That's what I love about this topic. It's not just about the tools. It's about how they shape the experiences we're creating. So in this episode, I'm going to walk you through my absolute favorites. We'll cover the woodworking tools that I keep reaching for, including one budget-friendly choice that any beginner could pick up today without breaking the bank. Then we'll move into my go-to outdoor cooking tools. The things that never let me down, whether I'm smoking a chicken low and slow or searing steaks hot and fast. After that, I've got a wild card item you probably wouldn't expect me to rely on, but I promise it's earned its spot. And finally, we'll zoom out a little bit and talk about the bigger picture. Why the right tools matter so much, and how they can actually make the process of creating feel more like joy and less like a chore. My hope is that as you listen, you'll not only get a few practical ideas, but you'll also feel encouraged to look at your own tools, whether they're in the shop, the kitchen, or somewhere else entirely, and notice which ones are truly part of your rhythm. Because at the end of the day, it's not about having it all. It's about having what works and letting those tools support you in building, cooking, and living a life that feels grounded and joyful. So let's dig in. When I think about the tools in my woodshop that I truly can't live without, the list is shorter than you might expect. Sure, there are dozens of gadgets and specialty tools out there, and yes, I've picked up a few along the way that I thought would change my life. But at the end of the day, the tools that keep me building, the ones I reach for without even thinking, are pretty straightforward. And what I love most is that these tools aren't about being flashy. They're about being functional. They're the backbone of my shop, and honestly, without them, the projects just wouldn't happen. Let's start with the orbital sander. If you've ever tried to finish a piece by hand sanding every single corner and flat surface, you know how quickly your patience runs out and how much your shoulders start to ache. Don't get me wrong, hand sanding still has its place, especially for small details or rounding over edges where you want control. But when you're working on a cutting board, a small table, or even just a piece of scrap you want to experiment with, an orbital sander is a lifesaver. What I love most is how it bridges the gap between effort and result. There's something really satisfying about running the sander across rough wood and watching it transform into something smooth and touchable in seconds. It's like this little tool is teaching you patience without punishing you for not having all day. And let's be real, if you're like me, sometimes the excitement to see the finished project can make you want to skip steps. That sander keeps me honest. It gives me the finish I need so I don't end up regretting a rushed job later. A quick story. My very first orbital sander wasn't anything fancy, just a mid-range one from the local hardware store. It didn't look like much, but that thing stuck with me through my first real projects. I used it to finish a bar stool I built years ago, and I can still remember running my hand over the seat once it was sanded smooth. It was the moment that project went from just wood to something I can actually use. And that feeling is addictive. Once you know you can take a piece from rough to finished with your own hands, with just a little help from a tool like that, you want to keep building. Next up, a good set of clamps. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can never have too many clamps. I didn't really understand this at first. I thought clamps were optional, something you only needed if you were gluing together giant panels. But then I tried to glue two boards together by hand, holding them tight while the glue dried. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. The board slipped, the glue smeared, and by the time I came back to check, the joint was crooked. Lesson learned. Clamps are like an extra set of hands in the shop. Actually, scratch that. They're like a whole team of extra hands that don't complain, don't get tired, and don't let go until you tell them to. Whether I'm gluing up a cutting board, holding something steady while I drill, or just needing a little extra support, clamps are always there. And the best part, they don't have to be complicated. A simple squeeze clamp or bar clamps can do wonders. I once heard someone say, "You'll always wish you had just one more clamp." And I laughed, until I found myself trying to balance four boards with only three clamps. Now I get it. Investing in a good set, little by little, has been one of the best decisions I've made for my shop. And every time I tighten one down and see those boards come together flush, it feels like the tool is doing the heavy lifting for me. Now let's talk about the cordless drill driver. This is probably the single most versatile tool I own. I've used it for everything. Driving screws into a workbench, drilling pilot holes, mixing small batches of epoxy with a paddle attachment, even tightening hardware when I didn't feel like grabbing a wrench. If my orbital sander is a tool that saves me time, my drill is the one that saves me frustration. I still remember the first time I upgraded from a cheap underpowered drill to one with a little more torque. It was a game changer. Suddenly screws actually went in straight without stripping. I could swap out bits without fumbling, and with a decent battery, I didn't have to worry about running out of juice halfway through a project. It was like the tool finally kept up with me instead of the other way around. What I love most is how accessible it is. You don't need to be a pro woodworker to justify having a cordless drill. Even if you just want to hang shelves, put together some furniture, or fix a loose hinge, it's one of the tools that makes you feel instantly more capable. Every time I pick up mine, I feel like I'm ready for whatever the project throws at me. And finally, let's talk about the budget-friendly speed square. This might sound like a small thing compared to power tools, but let me tell you, this little piece of metal or plastic is an unsung hero. Before I started using one, I didn't realize how much I was eyeballing cuts, hoping they'd be square enough. Spoiler alert, they weren't. A speed square takes the guesswork out of measuring and marking. It's simple, sturdy, and incredibly versatile. I use mine to mark straight cuts, check angles, and even as a quick guide when I'm setting up a circular saw. And here's the best part. You can grab one for less than $10. Seriously, it's probably the cheapest tool in my shop, and yet it's one of the ones I reach for most often. The first time I used mine, I was cutting some boards for a small shelf. I thought I was being precise before, but when I lined up the square and marked my cut, I realized just how off I'd been. That shelf ended up fitting together so much better than it would have otherwise, and from then on, the speed square has lived on my workbench within arm's reach. The cool thing about these four tools, the orbital sander, clamps, drill driver, and speed square, is that together, they cover so many of the basics. Sanding, holding, fastening, measuring, they're not flashy, but they're dependable. And that's exactly what you want in tools you can't live without. What's even better is that they're beginner friendly. You don't need to be a seasoned woodworker to use them. If you're just starting out, these are the tools I'd recommend every time. They're the foundation, and once you get comfortable with them, you'll realize just how many projects you can tackle, from cutting boards to shelves to bigger builds down the road. Because at the end of the day, woodworking isn't about having every tool under the sun. It's about having the right tools, the ones that support your rhythm and keep you moving forward. For me, these four are the ones that do that every single time. When I step outside and fire up the grill, it feels a little bit like stepping into a different world. The pace shifts, the air smells like smoke and spice, and suddenly dinner isn't just dinner, it's an experience. But like with woodworking, having the right tools makes all the difference. You can technically cook outside with just a fire and a stick if you want to get real primitive. But if you want food that actually tastes good and a process that doesn't leave you frustrated, there are a handful of tools that I wouldn't trade for anything. They're the ones I reach for almost without thinking, and while none of them are flashy, they're all MVPs in their own way. Let's start with a digital thermometer. I've tried them all. The cheap pocket ones you can get for a few bucks at the grocery store, the fancy Bluetooth ones that send your food's internal temperature to your phone, the wireless probes that promise accuracy within a fraction of a degree. And honestly, sometimes the simple ones work the best. Don't get me wrong, I love a gadget as much as the next person. And those smart thermometers can be fun when you're smoking something low and slow and don't want to hover over the grill for hours. But when it comes down to it, what I really need is reliability. A thermometer that turns on every time, gives me a quick read, and doesn't make me wonder if I need to charge it, calibrate it, or connect it to an app. I learned this lesson the hard way. There was one time I had a brisket on the smoker, and I was trusting this fancy wireless thermometer to keep me updated on my phone while I worked in the shop. Hours went by, and I felt confident that everything was cruising along. When I finally checked in person, the batteries had died halfway through and the brisket was way past where I wanted it. Edible, sure, but definitely not the juicy, tender masterpiece I've envisioned. On the flip side, I've had a cheap $10 thermometer that refuses to die. It's been dropped, left outside overnight, probably rained on a few times, and it still clicks on and gives me a reading in seconds. That little thing has saved me more than once, especially with chicken, because let's be honest, undercooked chicken is nobody's friend. A thermometer gives me peace of mind, and peace of mind tastes just as good as the meal itself. Next up, the cast iron skillet. This one almost feels like cheating because technically it's a kitchen tool. But for me, it earns a spot in an outdoor cooking category because I throw mine on the grill all the time. Cast iron is nearly indestructible and it doesn't care about the smoke or the flames. Where stainless steel might discolor or nonstick pans might lose their coating, cast iron thrives. I use mine for so many things, sauteing veggies while a steak sears nearby, crisping up bacon to crumble over a burger, even baking cornbread or cobbler right over the coals. There's something about cast iron that just feels timeless. It connects you to the old way of cooking, when meals were made slowly, with patience, and everything carried a little smoky flavor from the fire. One of my favorite moments with the cast iron skillet was the first time I used it to make a breakfast hash on the grill. Potatoes, onions, peppers, and a little leftover steak chopped up, all sizzling together while the morning air still had that crispness to it. Coffee in hand, skillet on the fire, the sound of food crackling. That, to me, is slow living at its best. And the best part, when you pull the skillet off and set it down, it doubles as a serving dish. Rustic, hearty, and completely unfussy. Now let's talk about heat-resistant gloves. Here's the honest truth. I don't wear them as often as I should. I'll be the first to admit that I've burned myself more times than I can count because I thought I could just grab it really quick. But when I do actually remember to wear them, they're a total game changer. Gloves give you confidence. Instead of fumbling with tongs, worrying about whether you'll lose a piece of asparagus through the grates, or trying to shift between a blazing hot cast iron pan with a dish towel, don't do it, trust me. You can just reach in, grab, and move things around. It's one of the tools that takes the fear out of the fire. I remember one particular cook where I'd piled up coals a little too high and everything was running hotter than expected. Normally, I'd have been dancing around the grill trying not to singe my knuckles, but with the gloves on, I was steady. I moved grates, adjusted pans, and didn't break a sweat, at least not from the fire. It was like suddenly having superpowers. So yeah, maybe I don't always wear them, but when I do, they're definitely the MVPs of the cook. And every time I get a little blister from being stubborn, I remind myself, next time, put on the gloves. And finally, let's talk about the charcoal chimney starter, or in my case, sometimes just good old tumbleweeds buried in a bed of coals. Let me say this clearly. Charcoal lighter fluid has no place near good food. None. It's not just unnecessary, it's borderline sinful. That chemical smell doesn't belong in your backyard, let alone your dinner. The chimney starter is simple, effective, and honestly kind of fun to watch. You stuff a little newspaper or tumbleweed underneath, fill the top with charcoal, and light it up. In minutes, you've got a tower of glowing coals ready to pour into your grill. No chemicals, no weird aftertaste, just pure fire the way it should be. One of my favorite little rituals is lighting a chimney full of charcoal right before a big cook. There's something mesmerizing about the way the flames flicker up through the coals, the crackle of the fire, and the anticipation of what's to come. It feels like the official start to the meal, the point where the ordinary day shifts into something special. And on the days when I don't feel like pulling out the chimney, I'll just bury a tumbleweed or two in the bottom of the grill, cover it with charcoal, and light it. Simple, clean, effective. Honestly, those little tumbleweeds are one of the best cheats I've found for outdoor cooking. They get the job done every single time. Together, these four tools, the digital thermometer, cast iron skillet, heat-resistant gloves, and charcoal starter, cover almost everything I need to cook well outside. They're not fancy, they don't require a huge investment, but they make the process smoother, safer, and way more enjoyable. Because here's the thing, outdoor cooking isn't just about the food, it's about the ritual. Lighting the fire, checking the heat, feeling the skillet sizzle, pulling food off the grill at just the right moment. Those tools don't take away from that ritual, they enhance it. They let me focus on the joy of the process instead of worrying about whether I'm going to undercook the chicken, burn my hand, or choke down a chemical aftertaste. At the end of the day, that's what the right tools do. They don't just make the job easier, they make it more meaningful. They support you in the process so you can actually enjoy it. And for me, that's what keeps me coming back to the fire again and again. Sometimes the most valuable tools in your shop or kitchen aren't the ones that look impressive hanging on the wall or sitting on the counter. They're the little, almost boring items that quietly save the day over and over again. But they might not get the glory shots in Instagram reels or woodworking magazines, but you'd feel their absence immediately if they weren't around. For me, those two wild cards are painter's tape and steel skewers. Different worlds, one lives in the shop, the other by the grill, but both earn their keep in ways that constantly surprise me. Let's start in the shop. Painter's tape doesn't sound glamorous. It's not a power tool. It's not even technically a woodworking tool. It's a roll of blue, or green, or sometimes purple, tape you can pick up for a couple bucks at the hardware store. And yet, it might be one of the things I'll reach for the most. For starters, it's a clamp substitute when you need one. If I'm gluing up a small joint and don't feel like wrangling clamps across every angle, a strip or two of painter's tape pulled tight will hold things in place just long enough to set. It's not heavy duty, but it's surprisingly effective in a pinch. Then there's this roll as a safety net. I use it all the time when I'm making cut lines. Instead of drawing directly on the wood and risking a pencil line that bleeds into the grain or is hard to erase later, I'll lay down a strip of tape and mark on that. Not only does it give me crisp visibility, but it also reduces tear out when I'm cutting, especially with cross cuts on plywood. The tape holds the fibers down so they don't splinter. One of my favorite hacks is using painter's tape as a hinge when I'm gluing boxes. I'll line up all the sides, tape them edge to edge, flip the whole thing over, and then spread glue on the seams. When I fold it up, the tape acts like a hinge, holding every square while I add a clamp or two. Clean, quick, and way less stressful than juggling slippery glue joints. But maybe the best part about painter's tape is how forgiving it is. You can peel it up, reposition it, use it to catch strips, label parts, or mark "Don't cut here" zones on a project. It's like an extra set of hands, but one that never complains. I'll never forget the time I was cutting miters for a frame and I couldn't get them to stay put while I glued them. Everything kept sliding around and I was ready to scrap the whole thing. Then I remembered the painter's tape trick. I taped the corners on the outside, glued the inside seams, and suddenly it all clicked into place. That frame turned out square, solid, and smooth, and painter's tape was the unsung hero. It's proof that sometimes the cheapest tools are the most versatile. You don't need to overthink it. A $5 roll of tape can solve problems that would otherwise slow you down or mess you up. And the best part, when you're done, it comes off clean. Now let's step outside again, because in the world of outdoor cooking, my wild card tool is just as unassuming. Steel skewers. Not the fancy ones with elaborate handles, not the disposable wooden kind you have to soak in water and hope they don't snap. I'm talking about simple, reusable stainless steel skewers. Straightforward, sturdy, and endlessly practical. Skewers open up a whole world of possibilities on the grill. Sure, you can use them for kebabs, the classic mix of meat and veggies charred to perfection, but they're also handy for things you might not think of. Want to roast marshmallows without chasing down sticks? Skewer. Want to flip a bunch of shrimp at once without losing them through the grates? Skewer. Need to test the doneness of a baked potato buried in coals? Slide in the skewer and see if it glides through. One of my favorite aha moments with skewers came when I was cooking chicken wings. I love wings on the grill, but they're notorious for falling through the grates or sticking. And then I saw someone thread wings onto skewers, like 4 or 5 at a time, lined up side by side. Suddenly, flipping them was easy. No lost wings, no uneven cooking, just crispy, juicy perfection. Skewers are also a lifesaver when it comes to portion control. When you've got a big cookout and people are hovering around the grill, skewers let you hand someone a neat, self-contained serving without grabbing plates or utensils right away. It feels communal, almost like passing around a tray of appetizers, only they came straight off the fire. And let's not forget about their durability. Wooden skewers might work once, but they're fragile, messy, and easy to forget about until they're charred to ash. Steel skewers, you wash them, dry them, and they're ready to go again. I've had the same set for years, and they've paid for themselves 100 times over. There's also something satisfying about the way they handle heat. You can hold a skewer of vegetables right over open flames and you'll know it'll hold steady. Try that with wood and you'll be fishing chunks out of coals in minutes. One of my favorite little rituals is loading skewers with whatever odds and ends I've got in the fridge. A half an onion, a few cherry tomatoes, maybe some leftover sausage. Thread it all on, brush it with oil, sprinkle some seasoning, and throw it over the fire. Suddenly scraps turn into a meal. What I love most about these two wildcard tools, painter's tape in the shop, steel skewers at the grill, is that they represent a bigger truth. The best tools aren't always the obvious ones. We often think the key to better projects or better meals is some expensive gadget, a specialized tool, or the latest innovation. And sure, sometimes a great upgrade makes a difference. But more often, it's the small, reliable things that shape the process. Painter's tape gives me freedom to experiment in the shop without fear of ruining a cut. Steel skewers give me flexibility at the grill to cook creatively without worrying about logistics. Both of them keep me moving, keep me creating, and keep me grounded in the joy of the process. They're not glamorous. Nobody brags about their favorite roll of tape or their old set of skewers. But when you use them often enough, they almost become invisible. Part of your rhythm, part of your toolkit, part of the way you live. And maybe that's the point. Wildcard tools remind us that creativity doesn't require perfection. It just requires showing up with what you've got, making the most of it, and discovering new ways to use the simple things right in front of you. Here's the truth. Tools aren't just about function. They're about rhythm. They're about confidence. They're about shaping the way we experience making. When I think back to my earliest projects, whether it was a clunky first cutting board in the shop or a whole chicken that turned out a little too smoky on the grill, what I remember isn't just the outcome. It's the feeling of learning, the small frustrations, and the tiny victories that came along the way. And in almost every case, the right tool made those moments possible. Let's start with confidence, because that's huge. If you've ever tried to drive a screw with a stripped out screwdriver or grill a steak without a thermometer, you know how frustrating it feels. It's like swimming upstream. You're working hard, but the results don't match the effort. The frustration can chip away at your motivation. But put a cordless drill driver in your hands and suddenly you're moving fast, clean, and precise. Or grab a digital thermometer and you no longer have to second guess whether that steak is overcooked. That's not just efficiency, that's confidence. And confidence breeds momentum. When you have the right tool, you stop hesitating and start doing. You can lean into the process instead of battling it. There's also this idea of rhythm, what some people call flow. In the shop, flow looks like this: sanding down a piece with an orbital sander, brushing away the dust, lining it up with a square, drilling in screws, clamping it tight, one step flows into the next, and before you know it, you've built something you can actually hold. At the grill, it's the same: lighting the coals, setting down your cast iron skillet, flipping skewers, checking temps, pulling everything off at just the right moment. Tools aren't just objects here, they're partners in a dance. The wrong tool throws that rhythm off. You're stuck fiddling, adjusting, or trying to make do. The right tool, it melts into the background. You hardly notice it because it's doing exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. But maybe the biggest reason tools matter is joy. There's a deep satisfaction in reaching for something and knowing it's going to work. When I grab painter's tape, I know it'll hold my miter corners just long enough to glue. When I pick up steel skewers, I know dinner will stay intact and cook evenly. It's not just joy in the result, but in the process. Because let's face it, half of why we build or cook isn't about the finished product. It's about how it feels to make something with our hands, to create order out of raw material, transform ingredients or lumber into something that matters to us or the people we share it with. Tools make that process smoother, less stressful, and way more fun. Now here's the kicker: the best tools aren't always the most expensive. I've used complicated digital thermometers that connect to apps, buzz my phone, track every degree in real time, and sometimes they're more hassle than help. Meanwhile, a simple instant read stick thermometer works like a charm. I've used heavy duty clamps with all kinds of adjustments, and sometimes all I really needed was a budget speed square to keep things lined up. That's the lesson tools teach us over and over. It's not about the flash, it's about fit. A tool earns its spot in your rhythm by showing up day after day and making the process lighter. And there's something else: tools hold stories. I've got a cast iron skillet that's been with me for years. Every time I cook with it, I think of all the meals it's been a part of. Or my cordless drill, which has built more projects than I can count. These things carry memories. Even painter's tape, as silly as it sounds, reminds me of the frame I almost gave up on, until that roll of tape saved the day. And skewers, they remind me of summer evenings. Friends gathered round, kids stealing food straight off the grill because they couldn't wait for plates. Tools become touchstones. They remind us where we've been and how far we've come. At the end of the day, all of this connects back to something bigger. Because yes, tools make woodworking and cooking easier, but they also mirror how we live. Having the right tool is like having the right perspective. It keeps you steady, helps you see clearly, and gives you confidence to move forward. And just like in life, the right tool doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to fit. Maybe that's why I love talking about tools so much, because they remind us that creativity isn't about perfection. It's about finding what works, leaning into it, and enjoying the process. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with this thought. The tools that matter most aren't always the ones that get the spotlight. They're the ones you reach for without thinking, the ones that turn frustration into flow, the ones that quietly shape the joy of the process. Whether it's a roll of painter's tape, a steel skewer, or a well-loved drill, the right tool doesn't just change the outcome, it changes the experience. And that's what we're really after here. Not just better projects or tastier meals, but a life crafted with intention, rhythm, and joy. So here's what I want to leave us with today. Tools matter. Not because they're shiny or expensive or the newest thing on the market, but because the right ones help us breathe easier in the process. They keep us moving. They remind us that making doesn't have to be a fight. It can be a flow. And more than that, they become part of our story. When I look around my shop and kitchen, the tools I've talked about today aren't just objects. They're mile markers. My orbital sander reminds me of all the projects I almost gave up on before learning the joy of a smooth finish. My clamps are like quiet friends that always show up when I need a third hand. That little speed square has taught me that precision doesn't have to cost a fortune. And in the kitchen, my cast iron skillet has probably seen more family dinners than any single table. My thermometer has saved more chickens from disaster than I'd like to admit. The gloves, when I actually put them on, remind me to protect myself and slow down. Even skewers and painter's tape, as ordinary as they sound, hold their places as tiny lifesavers. That's the heart of it. The right tools make the process more joyful, not just more efficient. And in a world that constantly pushes us to rush, anything that brings joy to the process is worth celebrating. So here's my encouragement for you. Take stock of your own tools. What do you reach for day after day? What feels like second nature in your hands? And maybe just as important, what frustrates you? Because sometimes the best way to grow in your creative life isn't to take on a huge new project, but simply to replace the one tool that keeps slowing you down. If you've been putting off trying woodworking because you feel like you need a full shop, remember the speed square. If you've been avoiding the grill because you're scared of undercooking meat, remember the thermometer. Start small, start simple. You don't need everything. You just need enough to keep going without frustration stealing the joy. And as you do, don't forget to notice the story you're building, because one day, those ordinary tools might mean more to you than you think. Now you might be wondering, why dedicate an entire episode to tools? Because tools are the bridge between intention and action. They're what take an idea in your head and turn it into something real you can hold, taste, or share. Without them, our creativity stalls. With them, our creativity flows. And honestly, I think there's something grounding about celebrating the little things we often overlook. A clamp, a roll of tape, a cast iron skillet. These aren't glamorous, but they're the heartbeat of the process. And if we can find gratitude in the little things, we'll find a lot more joy in the big picture too. If this episode made you think about your own must have tools, I'd love to hear from you. What's that one tool in your shop, kitchen, or daily life that you couldn't live without? Maybe it's a handed down hammer. Maybe it's your grandmother's mixing bowl. Or maybe it's something as simple as a wooden spoon that just feels right. Share it with me on Instagram. I'm at Third Shift Crafts. Or leave a comment on the blogs at thirdshiftcrafts.com. Your stories inspire me as much as I hope mine inspire you. And don't forget, this podcast is just getting started. In the coming episodes, we're going to talk more about the connections between making and living, from how woodworking and cooking intersect, to how small handmade touches can elevate everyday life, to what's coming next in season 2. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss any of it. At the end of the day, tools are just tools, but they're also symbols. They remind us that we don't have to do everything alone, that we can lean on something outside ourselves to make the work lighter. And maybe that's the deeper truth tucked away in today's conversation. Creativity doesn't have to be a solo grind. It can be a rhythm, a flow, a joy. So whether you're picking up a drill, a skillet, a square, or a skewer this week, I hope it brings you more than just a finished product. I hope it brings you that small, steady joy of process. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'm Lauren with Third Shift Crafts, and this has been episode 6 of the Third Shift Crafts podcast, Tools I Can't Live Without. Until next time, keep creating, keep slowing down, and keep finding joy in the process.